my idea is because the seminar is more on individual person and its challenges that secularization just brings out for him or her. I was thinking how we so in personal aspect of the life it has to do more with ethics and morality. So how the morality is starting or requiring explaining the human personality in terms of our abilities and which part of human faculties involved in our moral action. And all the traditional religions requires, a divine power or powers are responsible for all that we experience in this world and universe. So there is a kind of discrepancy between the moral and the legal life and the unity of everything through this divine power of powers. But for me, the polytheism, that if that were the case, as the anthropologist suggests, is the kind of secularization of this world in our mind, because different divine powers were responsible in certain areas of the universe, and it also divided people not in terms of real life concerns, but in terms of our belonging to that group of people, and whose area of domination is limited. So in a way, monotheistic or mystic approaches this human situation brings out the relief, making the divine power or a single divine power uniting all the forces in the universe, including the man. But this created a lacuna, an empty space for moral and legal areas of life. Most of our theologies, one way or the other, are deterministic. But we needed to explain and also to make man responsible for his moral and legal actions. I divide the legal and moral actions whose effects are limited are moral, and effects basic principles, and more people are legal. So this is maybe a temporary distinction, not probably fit to the teachings of law schools and things like that, but just for practical reasons. If you say something bad things to me and make me feel like dumb, it is morally wrong. But if I break one of these tables, you see, everybody in this country has a saying in it. Somebody just, make a donation, and, this is, I don't have this right to do. People wanted to, have this something to be used by many people. So this is illegal. I have to compensate my action. In that sense, the moral thinking after the Enlightenment went towards the way how to assert that we need to accept the human free will. In Western traditions, for instance, only the Maturidi tradition, which were in today's Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, all those cities around there, clone the idea that human will has a limited freedom area in the social area. In the physical area, the absolute power of God prevails. So we have in the social area, our will are effective. But the other Muslim schools of theology are similar to basically Catholic theology. So as long as God doesn't want you to give, to punish or forgive, you cannot, your actions does not have, your actions don't affect His will. In that sense, the Kantian ethics was a primordial an example of secular ethics, because it is based on the first premises that the free will is the most universal faculty of human beings. So what Kant expected is to establish the morality without reference to God. God is only a postulate to support this morality, not necessarily to establish. The legal area are left to the states, and moral area are left to the individual with self-regulating human reason. Reason is going to kind of guide our moral choices. Moral choices are made depending on the individual freedom of individual will. But the ordinary life, in this sense, made the human will limitless. So we are living in a community of people whose free will is not limited by anything. You don't have to follow everybody. Everybody don't read Kant. His only criteria is something morally good is that it shouldn't be take any human as a vehicle, or it should just be your purpose, and it should follow the only the made under the self-regulating reason, the decisions. So as if everybody in ordinary life, and if it is something related with natural good or pleasure, these cannot be. But the life cannot be limited that way. So it is limited by community, by our other concerns, by our relation with the divine one way or the other, and the laws and everything are somehow related. This is, in that sense, I found that this question yesterday, as I mentioned, led to finding this source of freedom in communities. This should lead us either the traditional ethics, connected with the theologies, either to pantheism or fatalism.
Could you say that again?
Either it is led us either to pantheism or fatalism. And the prime example of these were before Kant. So Kant was trying to relieve the morality from this danger. On the one side is the Spinoza, on the other side is Leibniz. You see, it's just a hierarchical scheme of things related or all the beings are related to each other, but with no freedom. You are limited. Kant wanted to salvage the freedom, but the later developments, and believe me, these were introduced into the teaching. For instance, Kant was translated very early, even in Ottoman times. It looks very fine construction at first sight. It supports our tradition coming from Maturidi, but here is the danger lies. As long as I don't use any person as a vehicle or instrument for my actions. So it is a consensual. In other words, the other person also freely choices. You see, this supports our legal problems you are mentioning. You see, Canada is reducing, right, the age for the rape to 14 years. You see, the consensual in the United States is 18 years old, I guess. And Canada reduced it to 16, and there is a certain 14. And say a 75 or 80 years old man have a consensual relation with a 15 years old girl. What is the future? They have a child. We know the life expectancy. Who will father this child? You see? So when does Kant's self-regulating free will or reason, does it have an age limit? No. In that sense, these lacunae, the empty space, are filled with all our conflict desires, what we call egotism, the base for egotism. And just not because I expected Sergei and Polina were going to be here, I was going to use three critique of this through Tolstoy's stories, translated as What Men Live By. Yeah, I sometimes use those stories for teaching some theological questions. As you all probably, some of you are familiar, one story is about a poor shoemaker. And he goes to collect, people just owe him some money because he made, them shoes and repairs. And he's living on the basic minimum necessities at the level of, and so does his wife, and he borrows his wife's coat. They use one coat to go out in that hard winter, or probably he described as the Moscow or even northern places. And he meets purely naked people in a sanctuary. And he gives that only coat, brings him home, and he becomes as if his apprentice. And it turns out that he was the angel. Because he 3 times laughed at the situation. He never spoke anything. And it ends with both a statesman, rich, and bringing a very valuable, piece of hide, and saying, if you cut, a piece wrong, you will be, death and things like that. It turns out he dies before he wears that order he made. And because he was angel, he sold. So it is the poor people are living with the same trust that many world religious theologies, like deterministic theologies, this is our destiny, but what unites them, his wife, and no questioning, and him, despite they live at the edge of, the basic necessities, is love. And I read many ordinary people's review on the social media. They say, "Oh, I'm disappointed. I better go to listen to a preacher." I didn't expect Tolstoy preach like this. They immediately recognize it's a critique of this modern or secular morality. It's not based on freedom, it's based on love, but it cannot be, say, conceptualized. I mean, we don't believe God because He always gives us, benefits. Despite the difficulties, it is difficult to be believing, despite the fact that you may be living at the bare minimum ground. The second story is about how much land does a man need? It's an interesting question. These are a bunch of villagers or mujiks, living on hired pieces of land by a big landlord. And they were always complaining about, his injustices, immoral treatment they received. So their complaint about their life situation is personal and moral. And finally, they had an agreement. They are free to own the pieces they, in return and in installment. And when they freed, one of them is, start thinking about his passions, yet more land. And at the end, he goes to a very famous Tatar who owns, unlimited land in somewhere in the north. And he says, "I want to buy land." "Okay, you can buy as much as you like, What? How much? "Well, how much you have?" "Okay, I have this." "Okay, you can buy." How much you can buy? All you have to do is come here at the sunrise, and you have to walk until the sunset, wherever, to the same point. Wherever you traveled is yours. Just probably 5 or 10 minutes before, he just fall and die. He can only get where he is going to be buried, you see. With all this money. Here there are two questions. He was, first shoemaker, was what the wisdom says, we are all servants of God. He was a real servant of God. No complaint. But this one, first servant of a man. And his complaints were all justified. But later he became servant of his passions. Greed. And he paid that with his life. Earlier, especially, the consciousness will give them, accept that they have a case here. They complain about the landlord is justified. because that is human, and their will are dominated by others. Let them do what they will. But when we open the door, we might become servants of our passions. And the third story, I don't know what it is called in English, but it's a very short story, boring. And there's a young man, I forgot the whole plot. They have to go to rescue or meet somebody, and with the horse carts. And on the way, there is a strong storm, and he goes to another man's house in another village, and then they insist that just stay the night there because the storm is looming to be more stronger, and he insists to continue. And despite all the difficulties, he ran into the wilderness and lost his way in the snowstorm. And what happens is, he describes how those horses are obeyed the driver. And it is the way when we dominate, that's the critique of the Cartesian worldview. We think we have to dominate the nature, you see, and what it costs is it costs the detriment. It is detrimental to other beings. You see, this is rationalism, or the rules we put for ourselves. Okay, this is the case. Even it's a critique of rational ethics and kind of legality. You see, the engineering, the modern social engineering, and it costs those horses, we can say sinless and innocent horses dearly. That meant, stubbornness to follow what he put himself as the goal, and cost dearly to the other beings, and because the horse dies later than man in that story. So in some of the translations, there is one selection, only these three stories, strong stories in Turkish, and I checked the English translation, there are more others, but I only followed these three to show the distinction between the three areas of morality are dealt with by Tolstoy, and it's very poignant to the question we are discussing. Thank you very much for this. Societies, we are under the pressure of not just a duality, but also multiplicity of forces, or our own instincts. And if you are raised that you are a free man, you can do whatever you like, as long as you are caught by the legal authorities, you see? And it leads all the way to the cheating. If always first the media represent somebody like a very successful businessman, and nobody asks now, how did he earn this success? Whether legally and morally,
Some people
ask.
Some people ask.
Some people ask, but this is not part of our discourse. And it creates us, there is one thing, the power. We all define success, without its moral or legal content. So it's everybody is our rivals, the competitors. So it's It's more complicated than just the state and religion, religious authority and the state. It's more complicated. We have to bring this moral issues into the public, discourse again in its own right, and it will help the political discussions. In a way, as you said, I mean, church is not in that discussion in the sense of bringing this. It's a sin. It has a moral, content in that objection.
No, there's also like a class issue here too,
Yes.
because it relates to morality and power.
Yes.
You hear people now, I certainly hear people now, especially in my classes, students who come from low-income backgrounds, looking at everyone who has a little bit more money and just assuming that they got that money in the wrong way. I have to point out, obviously, to many students that that's not always the case. If someone is successful, we don't necessarily need to condemn their success because we don't share it. That's simply not the way the system works. But there are implicit judgments that people make on the basis of class divisions, and those kind of interfere with how morality is evaluated between those, or during or within those interactions.
Yes.
And you have people saying, oh, if he's rich or she's rich, she can't be moral. Clearly she must have gotten that wealth in some kind of, shiesty sort of way. By the same token, you can look at lower classes and say their morality is compromised by their struggle to survive. People need to steal to put bread on their table. How do we evaluate our moral system when other compromises need to be made at those levels? Human society isn't and has never been homogeneous. Can our morality be homogeneous under those circumstances? Religion would say yes. Everyone has to obey the same moral guidelines, irrespective of income level. But the reality of it, of course, forces compromises that make the issue far more difficult to determine.
You touched on something there that's interesting a lot, because isn't it in some sense, doesn't that show that, I'm tempted to say the superiority of religion over secular ethics, and put it in those kind of terms, because doesn't every religion, I don't know, I'm not as well versed in comparative religion as some people here, but it seems to me that a big part of every religion is to control resentment in ways that secular ideologies and secular ethics don't do very well.
Sure. Yeah.
We see this in secular ideologies. They encourage resentment, and they encourage. Although sometimes they can also suppress it.
Marxism certainly encourages it, right?
Well, it can, but also in organized form, in practical form, like Leninism, it also suppresses it. But it also channels it into a much stronger. So it suppresses it in individual circumstances, but it channels it into a large collective resentment. And this is a theme which I'd like to see more of, is how do societies control resentment? And what is the role of religion? Because so much of it is, I see it a lot in certainly in Western religion, and it's very important, and it's extremely important.
That's a brilliant question. In Buddhism, for example, there are, if you're more successful, that means you have greater responsibility to the community. So then the evaluative measure changes. So you have the potential to kind of gather merit, let's say, for all your community of believers because you have more influence on account of that success. Someone who doesn't have that same level of success can do maybe smaller things to accrue the same level of merit and to do good for those around them. So I guess it's kind of like the old saying, with greater power comes greater responsibility. The idea that if you resentment,
much is given.
exactly. So the resentment is replaced by that kind of accountability. So you shouldn't. That's a hasty, short answer from that. But
Stephen, I have an example for the question you have raised. Is that, for instance, the Islamic text Quran requires everybody should pay 2.5% of their income to 6 areas: the poor, the elder, and the wayfarers and the students and so forth. Now, should state manage this, or it is just an a voluntary action? It's a moral obligation or legal obligation. If I say as a Muslim, for instance, it's a legal obligation. It's called purifying your income, because you might unintentionally. I'm not saying just prejudging you did something wrong, but unintentionally you did something probably improper. But and those who are poor, we have a role in their being poor, okay? But the modernity makes it like a judgment of class and things like that. Well, it is their own doing. I don't care about it. Yeah, I'm not making a generalization, but when I asked an American friend, what he thinks is homeless, he said, well, that's their own doing. Most of them are drunk and things like this. Could be the fact, but all the psychological factors and their families, and we are as a human, I mean, we are all, that's why we come from Adam and Eve. We have to talk and think about this if we are dealing with the traditional law, wisdom, knowledge. So, in that sense, we can easily dismiss the situation. And it's a quite good example. So if I propose it as a legal binding, then I'm being a Shariatist, Shariat, so Islamist or something. But if I don't do that, and if you leave it just to personal choices, and people are stingy. Yeah, they don't want to give, and it's a discussion among the Muslims. For instance, when you owe this money, is this: you have to have your 1 year's basic necessities are met. That housing, the traveling equipment, whether it's a horse or a car. I'm saying, suppose you buy a $500,000 car, a luxury car, if there is such a car, and I'm buying a $50,000 car, and I have an extra money, which amounts to like only $2,000. I have to pay from this. I have road debt. I'm running like $5,000 worth of car, and I'm living in a say $100,000, and you are living in a mansion like millions, and you owe some debt. You don't have to pay the zakat, and I have to pay. I have just $2,000 extra. We have still this kind of legal from the tradition. If you are a traditionalist, it's okay. As I mentioned, this is a legal loophole, okay?
And to answer your point about should it be mandatory or not, the state, of course, is not a disinterested party in this. When you empower the state to be the mediator, the state develops its own self-interest in collecting the money and redistributing it. What's also interesting, I'd be interested in people's thoughts about this, because I don't actually know a lot about this, but what's also interesting in that respect is how the systems of public administration that do this kind of thing and do it successfully almost all have some ethic, usually a religious ethic, behind them. In other words, in the Roman Empire it was Stoicism, and the Catholic Church it was obviously Christianity, in the British Empire it was Christianity, Confucianism in the Chinese Empire. Whenever you turn over the administration of society to functionaries, you need some system of ethics to keep them from plundering it in their own interests. One question I would let people get into at some point is, what happens when we have a modern, increasingly bureaucratized society?
Yes.
Society run by functionaries and apparatchiks, but the ethic which underlay that system has has withered away, deteriorated.
Has withered and become just a thin procedural morality.
You have a tax exemption for about $2,000. It doesn't matter where you donate it, you know, to a lobbying firm or, you know, to the poor. So it should go to where most needed. But, you know, the modern state regulates everything. In the United States, I think you have some amount of exemption, tax exemption. Suppose that you are donating it to, you know, certain charities and things like that, but it doesn't matter whether you are giving it to a fun club or going to the, you know, feeding people or this and that. One time, early in Muslim history, the second Caliph Omar is known his being very sensitive in justice, and he kind of scolded one of the Prophet's friends, close circles. He was resenting that, saying, for the rich, this 2.5% is not enough. Because mentioning another Quranic verses, blaming those who collect gold and silver, saying that this is a scolding and this is the basic minimum. But the state must raise it higher.
Progressive taxation.
Yes, the state tax is different, but some people are getting the loophole saying, I don't have to pay because I pay taxes. State should pay within it, you see? And these are issues very complicated. It has no limit between Christian or Muslim. We have to change our way of looking at these, I guess, yeah.
A small intervention, as long as you are having your speech. I was thinking about Zygmunt Bauman's postmodern ethics. And I don't want to insist on it, but to retain only that there's, in the postmodernity, there's a difference between legal and moral. You can be very legal, but very immoral, and vice versa, you know? And, but what I want to ask you, you were saying about not the dual, but that there are multiple. There is a term, Protean man, you know, thinking about protea, the informed matter in the Greek philosophy. Man that can take any form that is required from him. You know, at job, you have to act according to code, legal or moral. In the family, we have a different code. In the street, morally, I think, we have a different code. And it seems not to be a problem, you know? And what I wanted to ask you is that once you adapt to this kind of environment, to say so, doesn't it act like a forbidden fruit that allows you to create your own, or to be your own reference system according to God or to reality, but not to the law? You know, that once you make a sin, say so, you sin, you see that nothing happened. That in a different system of value, it can be very, how to say, justifiable, I don't know, but it's normal. It was good for you, okay, nobody hurt. So, it's good. You start to create your own. It can be this work as a, I don't know, as a, as I said, as a forbidden fruit that changes all your
Professor Dora. Bill, or Professor Dora and Professor Osman.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Professor. But who or what qualifies a deed as good or bad? I think this is the main point.
Yes.
We talk about ethics and morality. In Orthodox theology, from Orthodox theological point of view, the moral law expressed in the Jesus teachings does not act as a censorship of freedom, but on the contrary, it specifies it. Let's take an analogy. If you go to swim in the sea, assuming that you can drown yourself, there is that buoy, chamantură.
This the limit of from that ball that says you not to go further because the water is too deep.
That makes you aware that the risk of drowning is imminent.
The depth marker.
Yeah, that marker. So that marker does not forbid your freedom to swim,
Yeah.
but it just tells you from that point the drowning is much more probable. The moral law in Orthodox theology is something like this. It's not limit your freedom. You know?
Yes. I mean, of course, to just base an idea in opposition to others, there are, as I said, most of the mystics seems to be like determinist, you know, and also, as I said, probably, as I mentioned, the exemption as the martyrdom and your explanation is okay with me as a Muslim and as a believer. But the problem is this language we develop, theological language, is far away from the ordinary. You know, it's very complicated. So they feel themselves free in a sense, and at other times, ordinary people are pragmatic. I mean, they go to, religious sanctuaries or, you know, to pray to have their, you know, income increase and things like that. But yeah, it's very complicated. That is the conflict. People feel that their desires and feelings are effective on the things that, you know, in daily life, but at the same time, we are all, governed by our Creator.
Do you think
Yeah.
so? That theological language creates this tension.
Yes, we couldn't find. This is the questions we have to deal with at the metaphysical level. What kind of language we develop that makes it people morally and legally, you know, responsible.
Great, yes.
Yeah.
You know, in Judaism, the moral law starts with these words: "Don't do this, don't do this." But in Nine Happiness from
Yeah.
Matthew,
It's legalism and moralism. I didn't mention just,
Yeah.
they created an aura that if I say something I will be blamed, but I put in my writing
Yeah.
that
what I'm trying to say is
Judaism is the secularization of religion at first, because it takes the unity of God, uniting everything in the universe under His power, and making the rules only applicable to a section of the humanity, you know, to Hebrews. So it's limiting the area of legislative or moral application of God's rules to one part of humanity and leaving the rest on his own.
Right.
And this is a first form of secularization. I mean,